Yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. NATO issued a very strong statement in September 2022, immediately after the attack on the Nord Stream pipelines, in which it spoke of a deliberate, reckless, and irresponsible act of sabotage. A retaliation has even been announced. It was stated that any deliberate attack on the vital infrastructure of NATO member states will be met with a determined and united response. At that moment, the prevailing belief was still that Russia was behind this, no matter how illogical that seemed from the outset. But meanwhile, more and more is being revealed about the suspected perpetrators of this. An international arrest warrant has now been issued because Ukraine is believed to be involved and Zelensky is said to be aware of this. This would mean that a non-NATO member state has been involved in an attack on the vital infrastructure of NATO member states. Meanwhile, that support from NATO continues unabated on the military front. And my question is, are these new developments not a reason for Admiral Bauer to reconsider the support for NATO or for Ukraine, the nature and extent of it, or at least to suspend it until the truth comes to light?
Admiral, first, in my opinion, it is important to note that NATO has never attributed who might have done it. So in that sense, it has never been part of the response. Two, it is not directly the case that Nord Stream is owned by member states. In my opinion, it was a private sector that owned all those pipelines. And I will not make any statements about who did it or not, because that is a topic that is not discussed within NATO and has only been written about in newspapers so far.
Yes, Chairman. Building on my first question, as powerful as NATO's statement was immediately after the attacks on the Nord Stream, the response to these new revelations is actually quite weak and hesitant. What is most remarkable is that Admiral Bauer suddenly feels the need to emphasize that Nord Stream is not owned by countries, but is privately owned, while in that original response there was still talk of, and I quote, an attack against allies' critical infrastructure, which should be followed by a strong and determined retaliation. So up to this point, my dissatisfaction with this flip-flopping, which does not benefit the credibility of NATO in this matter, but that actually brings me to the most important point. Admiral Bauer stated that everything being said now about possible involvement of Ukraine is based solely on newspaper reports. That is not the case. An international arrest warrant has been issued by the federal German judge. That is something different from a newspaper report. And of course, we still do not know exactly what the situation is, and there are also indications that the US has a role. But it should be only logical that if there is even a suspicion that Ukraine itself is involved in an attack on our vital infrastructure, it is absurd that we continue to provide unwavering military, political, and economic support to Ukraine while awaiting that investigation. Has Admiral Bauer ever considered putting that support for Ukraine on the back burner, or at least reconsidering it until it is clear who exactly is involved in this attack on our vital infrastructure?
It is a political decision whether or not to provide that support. Yes, so I have. You said to stop it. You are right. You are right that you said it was from the governments. Allies' critical infrastructure is something else. That is not the same as being from the government. Yes, you are correct that an arrest warrant has been issued against a Ukrainian man. That is true. And in my view, as well as in the view of all political leaders of NATO, it is simply not sufficient to withdraw support for Ukraine.